Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between.
Welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. This week, we can look at the human factors in the rail industry, and this time, we're going across the water to Ireland. But before we get into the main episode, just a quick reminder that if you want to hear chat and discussion on human factors news, people's questions from the internet on a weekly basis, then do check out our sister podcast, Human Factors Cast, which can be found on your favourite podcast directory, or YouTube, Twitch, and now even TikTok. Nick, Rome, and myself record the podcast live every Thursday evening in GMT time from 10 p.m. until midnight. If you've not seen it before, the podcast is only an hour long, but the live element also has a pre and a post show part to it, where we're a bit more relaxed and we're putting the show together. You get to see a bit of behind the scenes. And if you comment on the social feeds while we're doing that, such as LinkedIn or Facebook, then we like to respond to the comments and engage. I also rebroadcast them through the channel for 1202. So do feel free to drop in and comment. That happens every week or most weeks anyway, and is always live. So you also get to see when things go wrong, which is highly amusing. Less so for me, more so for you. Anyway, on to today's episode. I mentioned on the interview with David Golightly that Nora Balfe, who joined us on the episode on the run-up to EHF 2022, has agreed to come back on. And she clearly didn't get enough of it first time. And I'm delighted to say that she's here with us today. So welcome, Nora, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Barry.
On that last episode, as I said, we largely focused on the work you were doing with Conference. So this time I really want to get to know more about you, your background, and your work in the rail industry. But before we get into that, this was the first EHF conference that you were co-chair of on the program committee. Did it all go off in the way that you wanted to?
Yeah, I think it did, actually. Yeah. The big worry, the big stress is whether we've got the keynotes right, and got lots of positive feedback on the keynotes. So that was a big plus. And yeah, and getting back together live for the conference and seeing everyone, it was restorative almost, if it's not too strong a word.
No, I think that's absolutely spot on. I mean, from my own perspective, I thoroughly loved it, and it was getting that blend right of the online and the live, and being able to just see people, and I guess more importantly, have a glass of wine and a catch up with people in the interims was absolutely fantastic. So absolutely brilliant, and well done to you and everyone else.
Thanks.
But let's talk about you for a bit, because we talk about other things quite a lot. So let's make all about you. Just so people get an idea of kind of what it is you do now and what you do on a day-to-day basis. What is your current role, and what do you do?
So my current role is human factors specialist at Irish Rail. Until recently, I was the human factors specialist at Irish Rail. So we've started growing the team, but my job has been to really build human factors expertise and capability in the company and embed it. So my day-to-day work is varied, as you might imagine. It kind of ranges from interviewing drivers after incidents through to writing human factors integration plans or reviewing them from suppliers and working on safety culture. So yeah, all the human factors.
All of the things.
Yeah.
I've noticed, yeah, it's a fairly good point, that isn't it, that you're that you guys are actively recruiting.
We are. Yes.
So anybody who is out there who is looking to go and get involved, then they're easy to find adverts. And if I get my admin together, I will put one in the description to this podcast as well.
That'd be fabulous. It's a great role. Lots of great projects in Irish Rail to work on and get stuck into.
Got to be honest, I was tempted.
There's still time.
I don't know whether I wish myself upon anyone. So obviously, what you're doing now, I mean, the human factors representative in Irish Rail, and hopefully growing your team and all that sort of stuff. How did you get started? When did you first find out that this thing called human factors existed and that you wanted a piece of it?
Yeah, that's going back a while now. Yeah, more than 20 years ago, when I was doing my undergraduate final year project, I was studying aeronautical engineering, and the project topic that I was given was aviation accidents and what engineers can learn from them. So obviously, once started researching aviation accidents, the whole human factors elements started to come through, and I was hooked. So all my case studies that I picked, apart from one, were about human factors. So yeah, that's how I got to wind of the discipline, I guess. And then I took myself off to Cranfield to do the masters there. I think it was only the second year that it had run in Cranfield when I did it. Yeah, that's how I got started.
So from being that young, keen and eager, shiny new person, how did you get to where you are now? So what's been that career path for you?
Convoluted and complicated.
Oh, cool.
Settle in, Barry. Settle. Yeah, no, I've jumped back and forth between academia and industry, and between different sectors. So mostly rail. But obviously, I started out in aviation with my undergraduate, and the Cranfield course is very geared towards aviation. But then I was offered a PhD scholarship by Network Rail, and famously said at the interview that I would go back to aviation afterwards. But and I did briefly, but then I came back to rail. So yeah, worked in air traffic control. I've done a postdoc, working mostly in the process industries in Trinity College in Dublin. I worked for TRL for a little while as a researcher there, and took a brief foray into regulation at the railway regulator in Ireland before I moved to Irish Rail. So moved around a little bit.
Oh, that's cool. But that must have given you, or did you find benefit from being able to go from, I guess, firstly, the different disciplines, but also then how going in between industry and academia, almost like back and forth. Do you find that really contributed to how you've been able to perform?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't have done it differently in hindsight. I've learned something in every job I've done, and the different perspectives, and the human factors problems and approaches are often quite similar, but the way the industries work and the governance they have around projects and things like that can be very different. And all those different perspectives have been really useful.
I've heard that even some industries even have governance, which is
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
fantastic. So what we'll do now is we'll just take a really quick break, and then I want to find out a bit more in detail, because the rail sector is something that I'm very new to. I've spent most of my time in defence and aerospace, so I want to learn more. So we'll be back right after this.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
And welcome back. And in this episode, we talked to Nora Balfe about her work in the rail sector. So, Nora, really at that high level, how does human factors? It sounds like almost a dumb question, really, but how does human factors get involved in rail? Well, what's the scope?
Yeah, it's same as any other industry. There's a lot of different ways. We have a kind of strategy in Irish Rail of where human factors fits in. So, and it kind of goes from reactive to assisting with investigations and assisting the whole investigation process, through to much more strategic, writing standards and guidance on different elements of human factors, and the whole area of developing safety culture. But 80% of my work is probably around human factors integration, human factors assurance on projects, and looking at the capital investment projects that we have coming through, and embedding human factors principles and activities in those to try and make sure that we get a really good product for end users in the end.
Is there a difference between the way that, I guess, HF and I guess HFI is done within Irish Rail as opposed to other rail, I guess, national bodies and that type of thing? Or is it fairly standard across the board?
I think there's probably a different flavor in every organization. I've kind of borrowed and stolen from all the different organizations and sectors I've worked in putting together our process. And again, going back to the governance point, I think different industries and organizations have their own governance processes, and you need to hang off that to have a human factors process that works. So I think it does vary a bit, but probably at a principle level, they're all very similar.
I guess that helps because, like you say, if you're the prime and the lead for Irish Rail, then where do you lean on to get I guess that whole where do you bounce ideas off and that type of thing? Because I found when I've been quite, if I go into either an organization or something as a lone contractor, you're sitting there going, I'm all on my own. I've got nobody to, and people expect you to be the person who knows everything. And I definitely don't know everything. And I like to bounce ideas off. And that, how does that work on your level? Have you found you deal with that?
Yeah, I get referred to as the human factors expert in Irish Rail, and I don't accept the title. It's too scary to be an expert. Um, yeah, I totally agree. It is almost lonely sometimes to be the only human factors person in an organization. But so one of the elements of our strategy actually is to have I have various labels for it, networking or knowledge development, or I can't remember the other synonym I have that it's moved as the strategy is developed. But it's basically looking outward. So I'm a member of there's quite an active actually European rail human factors community that's growing and building. So between the regulator era, the European Union Agencies for Rail, and the UIC, the International Union of Railways, they both have human factors networks that I participate in. So there's kind of a formal structure there, and then also talking to some of the other members in that more informally, to bounce ideas off them or see what they're doing in their companies, or what direction they're going, what's worked, what hasn't. So that's one element. And then within Irish Rail, there are people who've, before I joined, human factors wasn't a new idea to them. So there are people who have maybe not specialist knowledge, deep knowledge, but certainly a good understanding, a good awareness. So there's people there as well, and they can help with the culture of the organization, what will work internally, what's been tried before, what direction to go with. So I kind of have people that I've built up and can bounce ideas off when I think I might be onto something mad. Need to sense check it.
That's always the best time, though, isn't it? You think I've got a slightly crazy idea, but I just need to. Yes. You talked about doing a lot of work around HFI and in integrating human factors into new projects. What sort of projects are you talking about, and how do you ensure that you've got a human? Because it's always the big challenge, isn't it? Is if you get human factors installed into a project early doors, then that's where you get the best value. Doing it later on is always so. Oh, if only you'd done this. So, how do you make sure that HF is integrated, and what do you do around it?
Yeah, so for a start, very lucky that the European Railways Agency has written regulations that says we have to do human factors as part of change management. And so in our safety management system, we have to have something around human factors. So that's kind of given a hook to say, well, I think it's a great idea anyway, but we also have to do it. So that's really the push. So we have a safety management standard around change management, and the human factors integration is embedded into that. So when a project is proposing a change, they have to assess the human factors impact, and then that goes through me, and if it's rated as medium or high, they've got to put together a plan to deliver the human factors integration, which I've started to call human factors assurance, only because at kind of a European level, the term human factors integration gets referred to as the whole integration of human factors into rail operations. And
Right.
so just to distinguish it, I've called that process human factors assurance. So yeah, it's embedded in the safety management system, which means it's a need to have rather than a nice to have, which is us in a strong position.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that means that it's like nicely embedded into the culture and everything. So therefore, you're almost knocking at an open door. Well, hopefully, even though I bet there's still some people who grudgingly do it. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. But I find that when you start with a project, they're like, "Oh, what is this? I don't even know why you're here." And then you start to put together some of the plans, and they're like, "Oh, okay, we have to do this." And then they start to come up with their issues and the problems that they're getting stuck on, and they don't have anybody else to solve them. So sometimes they're actually, "Oh, this is what you can help me with. Oh, great, that's brilliant. Thank you. You take this really difficult problem that I didn't know how to do anything about, and you solve it."
yeah. But no, but again, but at least you're getting that sort of reaction. I mean, that's really positive. There is obviously other industries and stuff where people are just against it, full stop, and they'll
Yeah.
do everything again. So that's really reassuring. Um, I've heard a term, and apparently it's a big deal. SPADs. Uh, what are they, and why are they important?
Yeah, the railway has a real hang up about SPADs. It stands for Signal Passed at Danger, so SPAD. And the closest analogy that most people would be familiar with is passing a red traffic light.
Okay, right.
So it's a train going through a red light. So it was supposed to stop at the red light, but for whatever reason it didn't. Um, it's a little bit different from road because typically in road driving, the driver can stop. Well, almost always can stop um, within the distance that they see the light go red or go amber first. So you can see the amber light and you'll be able to stop at the red light in time. Trains are much heavier, much lower coefficient of friction between the wheel and the rail. So if you were to do that with a train and the driver had to stop within the distance they could see the signal, the traffic signal, the train usually wouldn't be able to stop, or very often wouldn't be able to stop. So the way the railway works is that the previous signal is yellow. And
Right.
that tells the driver, okay, the next one is going to be red. So you must be prepared to stop at that next signal, which then puts a whole memory issue on it. And there might be a station stop between seeing that yellow signal and the next red one. There might be other speed restrictions or other tasks the driver has to do. And it could be 30 seconds travel time. It could be 5 or 10 minutes travel time, depending on where it is. So there's a whole time period there where things can happen and the driver can forget that the last signal was yellow. So that's not the only reason that they don't stop at the red signals, but one of the probably the most common.
So I would guess that's it kind of leads me into almost realizing that I guess in today's world of automation and all that sort of stuff, we kind of assume that there's so much I guess digital readouts and everything in cabs because they're everywhere else. They're in aviation, they're in that sort of stuff. But by the sounds of it, we still rely very heavily on train drivers, going to call them pilots then, train drivers having, being aware of their situation and having real direct control over what the train is doing. Is there is there development of future technologies to help, assist the drivers in this sort of work, or are we still decades away from it?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's systems in place. So in Ireland, we have two systems already in place and have been since I think the 1980s, which one of them just repeats the signal in the cab. So there's kind of a reminder there for them. And they have to acknowledge it when it downgrades. So when it changes to a more restrictive signal aspect. And there's another one, ATP, which will supervise the train and will apply the brakes when it's coming up to the red signal if the driver doesn't. But the railway is very old. I don't know if you know that. It's been around for a while. And so when you try to design those kind of automated systems to overlay on a system that was designed by the Victorians,
Mm,
it works in most cases, but there's always the fringe cases where it doesn't. So there's now a new system as well that's much better or a much higher level of safety protection, the European Train Control System, ETCS, which is one of the big projects that we have in Irish Rail at the moment to implement this. And in theory, it's very simple. You put some digital devices on the tracks that will communicate to the train what the signal ahead is, and that it will apply the brakes if it's red and the driver hasn't done it, and it'll display in cab what speed they should be going in order to stop at the next signal. So those technologies absolutely exist, but they generate so many human factors problems as well, because then you have, okay, well, what if the signal's not working, or if you're in a location where it's a little bit difficult to put the technology in the right location, or you need to operate in a different way. So generates all these other fascinating problems for us to work on.
Well, I guess you'd be bored otherwise. I guess, I mean, that is a really significant point. You're effectively constantly retrofitting.
Mm.
Even if you put new rolling stock on, you're still on and antiquated, literally, rails and basically, I guess, network infrastructure would be the right term.
Infrastructure, yep.
Yeah, so that's check me. I'm learning things. It's and that. At what point do you turn around and say, well, actually, some of this just can't be done because of the infrastructure, and therefore, is there a golden point where certain things have to, wholesale upgrades and things like that, or is it just constant? That's just too expensive, and therefore you keep on doing what you're doing.
Yeah, there's all those scenarios are at play. So there's business cases written. So if you have your busy lines around big cities, those will be modern infrastructure with color light signals and modern interlockings. So the whole system behind it will be very modern, and you can do a lot of things with those. Um, but on kind of rural lines or lines that don't have a lot of traffic, there's not a big business case to invest in those. So sometimes they're still um, mechanically operated. So they are literally the system the Victorians invented with the signals are semaphore signals. They go up and down. They're not color light, and they're attached to a lever in a signal cabin that somebody pulls to put it on and off. And that obviously retrofitting to that, you get some funny situations where you're operating these levers, but then the other half of your control area might have migrated to a more modern. So we have people operating levers and sitting with their mouse
Wow.
operating via. Yeah, so there's a whole mix of technologies from the last 150 years, and they only get upgraded every 30 years or so. That's probably the life expectancy of a modern signaling system. So that's kind of the window you have to do
Yeah.
something new.
That's, on the one hand, obviously, it sounds a bit crazy, but you're right. From a human factors perspective, what an amazing opportunity to get involved in just such a range of different things on the same, almost on the same line, but like going, it's almost like working in history all the way through.
Yeah,
It must be so much fun.
it is. Yeah, no, I love rail.
Yeah. No, I can see why. I guess one of the less fun bits, or the more serious bits, to a certain extent, is that investigative part, because you mentioned earlier you carry out investigations when things don't go the way they should. How do you get involved in them? What's kind of your role there?
So it's mostly the SPAD investigations that I get involved with as kind of a default. It's interesting though, because a lot of our other incidents have kind of the same precursors, but the rail industry is not just Irish Rail, but generally the rail industry is a little bit obsessed with the SPADs. So
Right.
those tend to have a more focus on the investigation. Um, so my role has kind of become evolved to interview the driver afterwards. Almost a lot of the time, the immediate cause is to do with the driver and their actions. So I do a joint interview with our chief traction executive, which is a title that means nothing outside of Irish Rail, I think. But he's responsible for the competence management of all our train drivers.
Right.
So I kind of take the systems view, so what might have been influencing the actions, and he's taking the more driver development and training view. So what can all the other drivers in our network learn from this event? And then we do in Irish Rail, there's a review meeting within about a week of a SPAD where all the players will get together, the managers, the competence assessors, and whoever else might have been involved or been a stakeholder in the event. So I tend to go to those as well and kind of represent the human factors perspective. influencing factors. So it's been a learning journey for myself in terms of investigations, but also for the organization, because I think when I first started, they used to ask me along to say, well, what's wrong with this person? and then they'd be a bit mystified while I was saying, well, I think this signal might have a problem. Like, no, you're the human factors person. You focus on the human.
Yeah.
So it's been which is good opportunity to kind of build awareness of what human factors is really about, and to try and push the systems thinking and what are the influences on human performance. So it's an ongoing journey.
But sounds very worthwhile though. So when you've conducted that or been part of that investigation, then how does that learning get back into the business, into the organization to improve, or is it just, I guess, put in a box somewhere?
Not as much as I'd like. I mean, in fairness, though, each investigation will come up with actions that are kind of taken during the course of the investigation. So there'll often be improvements made as a result. There's always briefing to the drivers afterwards, but sometimes that's a little bit too soon, and we don't know all the kind of factors that might have been at play. So there is, and then there's of course the report itself, which will have recommendations for anything that's kind of a bigger, longer term change. So there is a lot of learning and feeding back to the business, but I personally would like to see much wider and kind of more less 40, 50 page investigation reports and more one-page summaries that more people and wider across the organization would read and learn from. So that's an area of improvement that we're kind of working on. We're aware of it, but change takes a while.
It doesn't. Everybody, it's that, I guess it's a common belief, isn't it, that if you don't have something thick and weighty that you can hold a door open with, then it's not good value for money. Whereas you're right, sometimes brevity allows you to throw messages out there much wider.
There's very few people are going to sit down and read a 50-page report, especially frontline staff. They have theoretically access to it, but I think if you want wider learning and to show staff that you are paying attention to not just what they do, but what influences what they do, I think you need to be much more succinct in the communications and targeted.
Yes, I guess because everyone has limited bandwidth for one, and frontline staff have got, I guess, the day job as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, you need to be able to pull that stuff in. I'm going to jump now into our final couple of questions. These questions that we ask everybody. Just to really get a flavour for what sort of things you do for fun. Do you have a book or a paper, either academic or in fact, even fiction? We've had some fictions on here as well. Books that you keep on going back to repeatedly, something that you just always pick up and you use all the time.
Yeah, a few. My go-to book if I'm stuck and I'm like, what, I don't know what to do next or how to address this, is Evaluation of Human Work. So John Wilson and Sarah Sharple's book. Everything is in it. If you need a starting point for something, there's always a starting point in there. Other books, if somebody is kind of saying to me, I'm interested in human factors, but what's it about? I'd like to learn more. I always point them towards Don Norman's Design of Everyday Things. I think that's kind of the perfect book to explain what we're about in a way that isn't about all the methods and the heavy theory, but just to get it across. I mean, specifically for the rail industry, there's a series of conference books. There's a rail human factors conference that RSSB run every few years. And the more recent ones, the papers are available online, but the first ones, the papers are in a book, in 3 books. And those are, if I can't find it in Evaluation of Human Work, I'll find it in there. And the other one is recently somebody recommended to me. I've been trying to do work on just culture, which is just very, very difficult topic. But a book that I've been kind of recommending to people in Irish Rail to read to get their head around it is Black Box Thinking, which is really good for like managers. It's written for that kind of audience, so it's been really helpful to get the ideas across to them.
And I guess on that just culture piece, by the time this goes out, there'll be than 3 podcast episodes focused on just culture. So if you wanted to throw them that way, then I'm just saying, just don't tell anybody else, or they'll all want some.
Thanks.
If you could go back to young Nora, what advice would there be? Any bit of advice that you'll give yourself, give your younger self, to knowing what you know now? Is there anything that you would encourage or discourage?
I was thinking about this, and I was thinking I still need to take the advice that I would give my younger self. Haven't managed to learn it yet. I think I'd try to say pick your battles, and don't get emotionally invested, and especially around the just culture topic. It's very hard, but you can only do what you can do, and you've got to kind of set realistic targets. I think that's sometimes quite hard for us in human factors, because we have such a broad scope, and we're so interested in the whole system and how it works, but actually we can only change the bits that are possible to change. So I think I think I would advise myself to be aware that there is a scope, and to be better at identifying and managing the scope that you're going to work within. Note all the other things, but don't try to do everything at once.
But that's difficult, though, isn't it?
It's so difficult. Yeah, that's why I said I still need to take this advice.
That whole not getting emotionally invested in what you're doing is, given what we do as well. I'd love to be able to sit back and say, no, that's fine. I'll let that go.
Yeah, I've started recently thinking, is this a hill I'm prepared to die on? And sometimes it is. Sometimes I will, like, it draws a line in the sand, but sometimes it's just, no, look, I'll put together the evidence that I've got, I'll present it, and then it's up to the business to see if they want to take it or not.
Yes. No, I think I would like to give myself similar advice, but I don't know whether I could take it.
Yeah, I'm still working on that. Maybe we need a support group.
A great idea. Nora, thank you ever so much for taking time out your day and coming back for a second bite at the interview piece. It's really, clearly the stuff you get involved with, I feel we barely scratched the surface of what you get to on a day-to-day basis. But thank you for giving us an overview, and maybe we can drag you back to at some point to talk about something quite specific to get into the nitty-gritty of. But for now, thank you ever so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
And thank you for listening and sharing in our experience. So all I would push out to you that are listening to this is tell your friends and tell your colleagues. And if you're especially feeling generous, leave us a review, or just get on the socials and comment on what you've heard. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Because the more that you comment and engage with the socials, then that means other people see it, and we can broaden the discussion. So really strongly encourage you to engage with us and tell us what you think. But for now, we shall see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.